Hi there. Today we're doing this beautiful Victorian corset with illusion and yoke. If this is something you'd want to learn how to do, please do stick and stay and let's do it together as always. Before we'd be able to sew this beautiful style, we first would have to draft our basic bodice. As you can see, this is our front pattern and that is our back pattern. In case you'd want to know how we came by these, I'll put a link in the description box. You can as well check it out on the top right corner of your screen. After we are done with this, we'll head on to modify the front pattern, then to the back pattern. The basic bodice extends only to the waist, and so in a Victorian corset, we'll extend this to the hip line. And so we are marking 8 inches from the shoulder to waistline. We mark the hip measurement divided by 4. Then we add our 2-inch seam allowance as we had in the basic bodice. Our model's hip is 40 divided by 4 gives us 10 plus 2 inches. We connect the side seam to the hip point here. Next, we'll mark our nipple to nipple measurement as we had here also on the hip line. The nipple to nipple is 3.5, and so we'll mark 3.5. Then we'll connect these 2 dot lines to this point. The nipple to nipple as we had marked here would also replicate the same thing to the other side. We mark 2 inches from the hip dot line towards the side seam. We draw a line connecting this very point to that point as we made sure we extended it just a little bit upwards. On the waistline, we are taking off 1/2 of an inch as that. Then we draw a line to connect this point to that dot and also to this very point, making sure it doesn't extend the shoulder to nipple line. From the shoulder, we would mark 6 3/4 downwards. That is where we would want the first part of the dress to be. Then we measure the dot interval at that point. Measuring it, we get 1 inch. We would want to widen this dot so that we get 2 inches as we have here. And so we would mark 1/2 of an inch on both sides. We connect these points to where the shoulder dot ended. At this point, we are marking 2 inches from the nipple line at the center front upwards. We draw an arc to connect that very point to the upper part of the bust here. To ensure that the distance from this point all the way to this point is equal to the distance from here all the way to that point, we would have to measure this and juxtapose that with the other. This is where the 7 1/4 gets to on the other side, making use of this and not the very first one. From the cross chest line here, we would move about 1/2 of an inch backwards and mark. Then we draw a line to connect the arm depth all the way to this half. This is to offset the dot that we've widened at this very point. Now we'll draw a line to connect this point all the way to that extension we just made. Now we'll connect this point and then we'll connect that point. At the hip line, we'll cut this off, fold this dot onto the next, and fold this also onto the other. Right, after folding this on, we're going to mark 1 inch on this side and then we mark 3.5 inches down here. Then on this side, we mark the 2 inches, which is our seam allowance, off. Then from that very point, we are going to connect to the 3.5 inches we marked down here. We open this up and widen that just a little bit. And so we are widening this by 1/4 of an inch, quarter, and then another quarter. This extensions we have made here is to ensure that the down part of our corset is really corseting. Now, we'll go ahead and fold this new dart on. We'll refine our V shape. We'll proceed and cut this off. Okay, lest I forget, I'm creating another boning channel that is 1 inch from this very dart towards this direction, and then from the center front we'll also move away by 1 inch. Bear in mind, this is just going to be a boning channel, and so we are not cutting it off. But then during the label, we label that as 1, 2, 3, and then 4. We connect this underbust dart to the nipple point using a bit of curve so as to accommodate the breast. Repeat same for the other side. Now we can go ahead and cut this out. With the top, we are going to join this dart that we had widened at the top here all the way to where the shoulder dart was. And we fold these 2 darts on. Since we do not want our cross chest measurement to shorten, we would have to measure our cross chest again so that we refine our armhole. So now what I'm going to do is that because of this very dart I folded, it has changed the shoulder slope, and so I'll straighten this very shoulder slope up, then measure the shoulder to shoulder again, and then we mark our shoulder slope. We can go ahead and cut this. With the back part, what you're going to do is that we'd also mark 8 inches below the waistline, and that will represent the shoulder to hip line. Then we mark the hip divided by 4 plus our 2-inch seam allowance. The dart interval is 3 3/4, and so we mark 3 3/4 down here. On this side, we'll take off our seam allowance, which is 2 inches, divide the rest by 2 and mark. We repeat same for the waistline. Then we draw a line to connect these 2 points, extending it to the hip line. On the waist, we will have to take off 1/2 of an inch as that allowance, and then we connect this point to that half and also to this point. We'll mark 1 inch from this side and wouldn't mark anything at the center back. Then we take off our seam allowance of 2 inches. We draw a line to connect the neckline all the way to the very first dart point. We mark 2 inches from the shoulder here downwards. We draw a curve to connect this very point to the second dart. Now, we'll go ahead and label this as 5, 6, and then 7. Then we cut them out. We'll then use this to cut our lining, our interface, and our fashion fabric. We have used our pattern to cut the interface, which has been fused with the lining, as you can see here. We have also fused another interface with the fashion fabric itself, the kente. I did so because the weave in the kente is not that strong, and so if you do not really attach something to it, you may end up freeing the whole thing off. After placing our pattern on this, we added our seam allowance to the side here. That was the number 2, and this was on fold. That's how come you see it opened and then you see this. When it comes to the number 3, we added our seam allowance to the front and to the back, not to the top, not to the bottom. When it goes to number 4, the seam allowance was added on the side that joins number 3. Number 5 also has seam allowance added on the side that joins itself to number 6. And then number 6 has seam allowance on both the left and the right. When it comes to number 7, the allowance is just on the side that attaches itself to number 6. The interface I've used for the kente is called collar stiff. Collar stiff in Ghana here. This is the collar stiff I'm talking about. It has a shiny surface, which is the adhesive, and it's also a fabric, very, very strong. This is a soft one. We have very, very hard ones that are very, very strong. Instead of this, one may also want to use the warding. Warding also comes in different sizes and then different textures. This is very, very hard. There are those that are a bit soft, like this very type, and it's also quite heavy. You may want to interface your fashion fabric with either of these. Now we'll go ahead and stitch the pieces together and join number 5 to 6 and then 6 to 7. That is for the lining. We repeat same for the other side. We repeat same for the fashion fabrics. When it comes to number 1, 2, 3, and then 4, we're going to do the same. It's very good to label them so that joining them becomes less cumbersome for you. This is it where we have stitched all the pieces together. So this is our lining, very well structured, and that is our fashion fabric. We've also stitched the back pattern pieces together. The next step would be to fix our bones onto the boning channels. What I want to ignore this time is this very one, because I've realized that more often than not, when you stitch your ridgeline bone on and the person is a little bit busty, when the person sits down, you see that there is a breakage under the bust. And so I would want to ignore boning this very channel. And then I would want to try the center front, these 2 lines, and we'd also do this straight one. Just ignoring this for the meantime, and then we see how it reacts. This is the ridgeline bone. We'll just leave about half of an inch allowance on the top here, and we fix it all the way to the down here where we are leaving another half inch allowance. We'll go ahead and stitch on the edge of both sides. Repeat same for the other channels, and then we'll come back to continue. When it gets to the back too, we'll do the same, where we'll stitch this and another boning channel on this other one. But on all of them, we are doing it on the lining and not on the fashion fabrics themselves. After inserting our bones, go ahead and put them good size together like this. Then we proceed to stitch on the neckline. For the upper part of our neckline, we had this as our pattern. What I've done is that I've used this to also cut another brown paper where we'll be able to open it up. But because we want to place a skin net in between the top part and the down part of our top bodice, I have decided to also use the same thing with this very mark, trace it onto another brown paper to get this. And so the down part here is what I've traced into getting this, which you can open. I've as well added seam allowance to the down part and also to the top part. That is because we have finished this top part already. If we don't add our seam allowance to the down part of the skin net, it means we will fall short at this part. When it comes to the upper part, as you see, that is the rest of the top, I've also used that to cut this, which we can also open. And then I've added seam allowance to the down part. And because of this seam allowance, I wouldn't make use of this seam allowance again. And so when we finish the top part of the top neckline, we're going to place it exactly on the skin net at this part, not using the allowance we have on the top here. And so we wouldn't make use of this, but then we'll make use of the down part. Once we have this done, we're going to place our skin net on this pin net, and then we'd also use this to cut the fashion fabric and its lining. So we have them cut now. We're going ahead to stitch this good size together. We're going to stitch this part. After finishing the down part, we'll go ahead and flip it over again. We also finish the rest of the armhole, and then we finish the neckline as well. Then we turn it all to the good side. Now we've stitched it, we'll just turn it to the good side. And so once this is done, we're going to place it right on top of the second line as we said. So we just go ahead and stitch this on. After stitching this beautifully, we'll go ahead and also fix the down part, making sure that we match it right along the seam allowance we marked down here. In this instance, we are going to do this and then we stitch on. So we get here and then we'll also swap to this side and also we stitch. After stitching this neatly, we'll go ahead and take off the paper behind it. To secure the net very well, I'll do a double top stitch here so that we'll be able to trim the excess. Once our front part of the dress is done, we move on to seal the back. We are placing them good size together, that is the lining and the fashion fabric. We're going ahead to finish the neckline and we'll also finish the armhole. After finishing the back neckline and the back armhole, what you do next will be to insert the front shoulder into the back shoulder with it turned to the wrong side. So once we have it like this, you can go ahead and stitch all around like this. Only have to take your time and then do the stitching.
This is our waistline for the skirt. The skirt length plus our 2 inches hem allowance is marked. Then from there we do 9 inches from the waist to the hip line. We divide our hip by 4, which gives us 10, then 2 inches. At the hem, we do 10 inches. And on the waist, we divide our waist by 4 and also add our 2 inches seam allowance. Then we join them to get our shape. We cut this out. So we open this up and then we take off 4 inches from the base. That is 2 inches seam allowance and then another 2 inches. Then from that very point, we mark 19 inches from the top all the way downwards. We take off our 2 inches seam allowance and then we join these two lines. This is to give us the asymmetric on the side. We fold in our hem allowance, then cut off this very shape we just marked. Now with this, because the waistline was extended by 1 inch, we will take off that 1 inch from the skirt so that it doesn't become longer than what we need. We mark this, put the front part of our bodice onto the skirt so that we're able to get the shape for the base. And so we cut the 1 inch off so that we'll be able to use this to cut the back pattern.
So we have used the pattern as we have it to cut out our kente beautifully. And in cutting the kente, I want to make it a little heavier, and so I've used this canvas. This is a two-faced canvas. It has a little bit of wording at one side and then it has the canvas on the other side. This is just to make it very structured. And so when it comes to the back, I've also used this wording to also make it a little bit more structured. And so we've just fused this in place just to make it heavy. After that, I'll cover this whole space with our tricot. This is the tricot. It's usually used for suits just to make it also heavy and more structured. And so I'll use this to also cover, just to interface it. It's all intended to make it more heavier at the down part and also to maintain the structure and the shape. So we'll go ahead and just fuse them and come back to continue. After cutting the skirt, we have shaped the front part just as we had at the down part of the top so that we'll be able to insert it as you see here. We've cut the linings, and so we'll go ahead and stitch this in place. We do so by first mapping the center front against the center front of the skirt, and then we sew to this side. Then we'll come to this side and also stitch it on. And so it's just going to be like this. We'll start sewing from here all the way till we get there. And then we turn to this side and also stitch on. We would as well fix the top of the back and then the skirt and the back skirt also. We fix them accordingly.
After that, we just go ahead and then fix our sleeve and, do the embellishments with the beads and the fringes and all that. And our beautiful kente dress is done. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I'm very appreciative of your support from day one. Please don't forget to subscribe and also keep your comments coming in.